Everybody has their own inner wisdom, but not everybody has spent time discovering what that is. Self-awareness is so critical. Using your loving instincts, caring, sharing, supporting, connection is the heart of our humanity. Our ego is a child of the mind. Take care of yourself so you can take care of other people. What are you doing to take care of yourself? If you can't do those, it's like trying to write a review of a movie that you haven't seen yet. The joke is breathe in, breathe out, repeat if necessary.
Welcome to MAGICademy podcast. Today with us is Dr. Greg. He has been spending 4 decades focusing on wise leadership, a type of leadership that requires us to go beyond simple tactics and strategies and transcend into a different mindset as loving, caring, and wise leaders. And he tackles this concept from 3 different dimensions. One is self-wisdom. Second is relational wisdom. The final piece is organizational wisdom. So it'll be interesting for us to dive deeper into learning exactly what that is and what that means. And so good to have you, Dr. Greg, to be with us and sharing your insight on wise leadership and then the leadership for the future.
Happy to be here.
Beautiful. So the first question is, beep, 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 beep. A spaceship lands right in front of you. Out walks a cute, friendly alien. If you were to use one word or one sound or one movement to introduce yourself, what would that be?
Well, if they've just landed in front of me, I would probably say welcome. Feels like somebody's knocking on the door.
Yeah, like you're welcoming them to
Yeah,
your space,
yeah.
the
You
space
open the
of
door.
planet Earth.
I want to find out who they are. Probably I want to find out where they came from.
Yes. So curious, why wise leadership? Why this becomes this focal point of your scholarship and experience and exploration?
Well, that's a really great question. In my research on leadership and on wisdom, I've looked at both of those concepts going back probably a couple thousand years, and they've always been here. They really point to the fact that everybody has their own inner wisdom, but not everybody has spent time discovering what that is. So taking the time to really delve into your inner wisdom to find out who you are and what you're about directly impacts the relationships you have as a leader and how you guide and steer the organizations that you're in. But the critical piece is uncovering your inner wisdom first. So,
That's
it's just it's a natural process, but it's not a process most people have taken.
and what is inner wisdom and how do you define that?
A lot of people define inner wisdom as self-awareness. You have thoughts, you have feelings, you have imagination, and then you have your physical presence in the world. Each of those are aspects of consciousness, or you're being conscious. And then on top of that, you have your unconscious, which has the keeper of all your habit patterns. So if you're really going to delve into your inner wisdom, you have to look at all 4 of those things and how they interplay with each other and how they impact your behaviors in the world. So we know that certain leadership behaviors are more effective than others, but you can't just go and change your leadership behaviors. You got to change what's the foundation of those leadership behaviors. That foundation is your beliefs about yourself, about leadership, about your organization, your values, what it is you value on your day-to-day basis. And then more importantly, but often forgotten, is the attitudes that you have towards those things. So that takes some time to delve into that. And our only connection with the world is really the experiences that we have and our perceptions about those experiences. So the question is it really a perception or is it a projection out of your own head? And if we go back to certain psychologists in the 30s, they've made the comment that all perception is in fact projection. Question is when you have an experience, is it a perception or is it a projection? So let me give you some reality on that. Let's say a person's driving a car and you can tell they're the ones driving because they're behind the steering wheel and they got their feet on the pedals. They're driving along. So you could say that's a perception that they're driving a car. Now, somebody cuts them off. There's all kinds of ways you respond. One is you slam on the brakes. Two is you get very upset at the person. Three is you call the appropriate authorities and say there's a crazy person on the road. Most of those are projections about the other person, and they come from inside of ourselves. So when we talk about inner wisdom, we've got to find out the experience we had. Was it a belief that we had? Was it a value mismatch? Was it our attitude about certain parts of the world? And are we projecting that on the other person? So it takes some special skills that are easy to develop. One is self-inquiry. You got to ask yourself these questions. Was it my beliefs? Was it my values? Was it my attitude? And then you want to reflect on that to get a deeper understanding of what's going on there. If you do that well enough, eventually you begin to have intuitive insight and you notice that a lot of what's going on is a projection. So
it's kind of like a self-talk, like kind of an inner conversation, and you have this wise sage sitting next to the inner you who creates all the perceptions and projections, and just have a conversation with that sage. I think in the case of you seeing a crazy person cutting off in front of you, a challenge is there's an emotion.
right on top of it, the foundation is the experience we had in those aspects of consciousness. So if we have a strong emotional experience that we have not resolved, that would tend to become our projection. We would tend to see that in other people, but it's really us projecting on top of them. And it's a simple process, but it's not easy. And it's not easy because you got to own up to your own stuff. And a lot of people just don't want to do that. They'd rather make it the other person's fault. So that's part of the wisdom process, is really taking a hard look at yourself or a soft look at yourself. Just looking at yourself and saying, okay, what is my projection here? So let's take emotions that you brought up. Emotions is just a term for energy in motion. Your body's nervous system reacts to that energy, and depending on the experiences you had, could just cause you to either live in the past or project into the future. So I just recently had an experience where I kept mulling over something that happened in the past, and I realized I had never come to completion with those emotions. So I spent some time working on myself with the emotions and getting it. And then, interestingly enough, as soon as I tapped into that inner wisdom or that self-awareness, all that stuff began to dissipate. I no longer have those thought processes that were triggered by the emotions. The other extreme, where I'm not living in the present, is I start projecting the future. Typically, people who project a lot into the future have challenges with being agitated because they can't tell whether the future is going to happen or not.
So angers and
Yeah. So,
frustration.
and if you live in the past, you'll probably end up depressed because you can't resolve the past issues on that. You can only move to a form of acceptance with it. Acceptance does not necessarily mean acquiescence. In other words, you don't give into it. You say, okay, that happened. There's nothing I can do about that right now. So I'm just going to stay here in the present, what's happening right in front of me. The nice thing, when you stay present, right, with what's happening right now, a lot of stuff begins to clear up. And that's where you begin to see your relationships with other people in a much more positive light. And you begin to, as a leader, develop a really receptive organization because you're not projecting anything on them and you're not don't have anxiety about how it's going to end up. That's
So
why there's
being
three elements.
being in the present empowers us to
Yeah, yeah.
do all that. Beautiful. Are there simple tactics? I mean, we're trying to go beyond tactics. However, I'm asking this question. Are there simple tactics or things that we can do on a daily
Well,
basis that helps us to
the
constantly orient
simplest
to present?
tactic right now is what's called mindful meditation, where you're breathing in, breathing out, breathing in, breathing out. That tends to make you present, tends to get you present. So if you focus on your breath and you're breathing in and breathing out, you're focused on what's happening to you physically right there and then. Once you get the physical balanced out, then you can work with your imagination, because what will typically happen is you're starting to do your breathing in, breathing out, and you hear a little voice inside it says, I'm hungry, let's go get a sandwich. So that's your imagination. Or you move into your emotions, and that's where you begin to understand that, wait a minute, something's triggering me. What is that about? Is that happening to me right now? The answer is no. So it's a way to let go. Then your mind kicks in, and our ego is a child of the mind. So our ego says, no, that shouldn't have happened to me. And it gets into defensiveness, or what I refer to as dexify: defend, explain, and justify. That's what the ego does. So just the simplest thing right now is just focus on your breath. It balances everything out.
Coming back to the example, so anything that triggers you emotionally, remember to breathe. And
Yeah, yeah. It's sort of the joke is breathe in, breathe out, repeat if necessary.
that's very useful. Beautiful. And let's now explore the second domain of the wise leadership, which is relational wisdom. What is relational wisdom? Is there a particular example, like the car example, and how can we develop relational wisdom?
Well, relationships are sort of the key to our connections with people. So if you're well connected with a person, it's because you've taken who they are at just face value. So probably the best critical aspect of that is the process of acceptance. They are who they are. But most people try to change people. That's why certain people will get married and then get divorced right away because they don't want to get changed by the other person. A lot of times, one of the key pieces on relationship is our ability to communicate with another person. So what are their motivations? What are their communication styles? What are their behavioral styles? Those are three aspects that impact what kind of relationship you can form. We tend to automatically project our own system on top of the other person, and that doesn't work real well. So you have to take the time to pull back, see who they are, ask them about their motivations, ask them about how they want to have communication come to them, and check in to see what their behaviors are. Once you get those three out, you're on a good path to relationships.
As human beings, we always develop, we always evolve, we always change, behaviors change, potentially value system change, and things change.
Yeah,
And how do we, I'm kind of like asking a very kind of multi-layered question.
I can give you an example if you'd like.
Yes, please.
Okay, so this is a senior executive I was working with, and the company was going through some major changes. And the senior executive had his entire team talk about the direction, the new direction. Everybody on that team wanted to go in that direction except the CFO of the organization. He totally did not get it and did not want to go in that direction. So I'm sure you know that you want to make sure the entire team is in alignment if you're going to change direction. So they had a conversation, and the guy just did not want to make any changes. He believed it was the wrong course of action and the wrong thing. So as I was talking to him, I said, you can always change CFOs. He said, well, Greg, I really can't because he's a lifelong friend. I said, okay, so you need to take care of your lifelong friend. So what do you mean? I said, it's your job as a relationship, long-term relationship, to help him find an organization where his thought processes are in alignment with where that organization is going. And then you can bring in a new CFO. He had never thought of that. So he started calling his friends up and finding out organizations that matched who he thought the CFO was. And he presented one of the organizations and set up an interview. The CFO loved it and said, this makes sense. I like this organization better, because they had a direct conversation about it. And it wasn't done behind anybody's back. It was done up front. Then the CFO left, and that gave an opportunity to bring in a different CFO who was in alignment with the direction of the organization. So both organizations and the CFO benefited. I had a conversation with my client a couple years later. I said, are you still friends with him? So we're even better friends today because he loves the organization he's in. So
Beautiful story.
you build a relationship, the relationship goes beyond your day-to-day work environment.
And that's also, I know this word is a little kind of, and people may think it differently, but the moment that you share the story, the word that pops into my mind is love. Because what is love? I think it is doing what's best for that particular person. And in your situation, he is trying to find a more nurturing environment for his lifetime friend.
Yeah. And actually, it's interesting that you bring that up because there actually is a fourth wisdom. It's called the wisdom of the heart. And the fourth wisdom is a thing that connects your inner wisdom, relationship wisdom, and organizational wisdom. You're finding more and more organizations that are willing to take a look at loving because it's an actual implementation of the word love. Many people define love as an emotional construct, and they say love is really nothing more than an energy overload, which is not really appropriate in a organization. So I ask them, I say, is it appropriate to have caring and sharing for the people you work with? And they go, oh, yeah, absolutely. Is it okay to have empathy and compassion for people? Oh, yeah, we can do that too. So why don't you define love or wisdom of the heart as that? Because that's all it really is. You're not doing an emotional construct just to overpower people. That might be appropriate in a marriage or with your kids, but it's not appropriate in a business construct. But caring and sharing and empathy and compassion, caring about people, sharing with people, and just being open and accepting with people. But you don't give in to them. You just go, okay, I accept that that's the way you are, and that works in this organization, or that doesn't work in the organization. So you're back to that CFO paradigm again. His behaviors didn't work in the organization for the change that he wanted to make, but he was able to change out the CFO by caring for the current CFO. So he implemented wisdom of the heart in taking care of both the organization and his friend.
That's beautiful. Third element is organizational wisdom. What is that, and any stories to
Well,
enlighten us?
that's probably the toughest one because you've got to get everybody in alignment with that. And the challenge is a lot of people have a belief that business is about beating up somebody and winning and creating an organization of destruction, if you will. They do not
Making a
look at,
dent.
yeah, they do not look at
Very
business.
masculine level of
They do
dent.
not look at organizations as for the highest good of the entire planet. So you find some companies that ship their pollution off to different places. And once it's out of their sight, it doesn't matter anymore, but the pollution's still there. So the question is it their consciousness that's polluted that's creating an organization that is polluted? And my experience is, yes, it is. But this is where the simple but not easy comes in. It's simple to start taking a look at that, but it's not easy. Because if you look at it, you'll find out, I haven't really been operating for the highest good of the planet. I haven't been operating for the highest good of everybody who's involved. So a lot of organizations have defined their stakeholders as people in the organization, the management team, the stockholders, and our clients. They don't look at anybody else as a stakeholder.
And it
But
should be a collective
yeah,
stakeholdership.
collective is a great word. So it's cooperation with all of the people who are on the planet. Conscious capitalism talks about that, so, and they're in the process of training people to do that.
Play devil's advocate. Being the, being collectively usually takes a lot of time and energy, and sometimes organizations need to make decisions really fast, or there are some emergency situations. How would they balance this collective higher good versus the need for the moment, and the organization needs to make quick decisions?
The organization has to give the individuals in the organization time to do something different than just business every day. Because if you sit at your desk all day processing paperwork, that's all you're going to see the business as. So a key piece to organization development is what's referred to as childlike wonder. Okay. So does the organization have an environment that supports people to do wonder things, to step outside of who they are? I'll give you an example of this. An example would be the current CEO of Microsoft. When he came in, core culture was what I refer to as intellectual. You were measured on how smart you were. You were compensated on how smart you were. He gradually changed that. And the way he did it was he got out of his office. He started talking to people. It didn't matter to him whether it was a lowest level person or if it was one of his senior executives. And he would ask them, how can we do this differently? And see what their response was. And he found out that some of the best ways to implement it came from very lower level people. Because by the time you got up to a senior level person, you were used to doing it a certain way. So then he started implementing some of the lower level stuff, and people were going, what? And then they saw the results from it, and they started changing. So he's radically changed the organizational culture and brought forward the layers of wisdom throughout the entire organization just by getting out of the office and asking questions.
And presenting people with an opportunities to speak their heart
Yes.
and to gain a sense of like contribution. And one thing I'm always kind of just I find it confusing and not as empowering is the structure of the organizations, and almost very hierarchical. And I do read some articles that in general globally the organizations are moving more toward like a flatter structure. And how do you see the future of leadership within organizations as those organizations start to become flatter and more inclusive and more heart-centered?
Most of the companies that need to make this kind of change do not have what's referred to as psychological safety. You're not free to express yourself. You're only free to acknowledge how you're doing it with the corporate culture, the current culture. So Google's a great example of something different. They actually ask their people to create a project for themselves that doesn't require any permission, maybe something radically different than what Google is doing, but ends up getting incorporated downstream. So people take the risk and they go, yeah, let's do this. And Google has the right to say yes or no. And some people who've been told no go out and form their own company and do it. And they're marvelously successful. They've got a culture that supports this organizational safety. I'm sure that there are parts of every organization where the leader is caught up in his own or her own ego about how things should be and don't have the organizational safety, do not have psychological safety. So if a leader has a great deal of self-awareness and they understand that there's many different perspectives to the way things can get done, they will take the time to open up and listen. So another key piece of this is the leader willing to just shut up and listen? And unfortunately, I find a lot of leaders aren't. They want to be the boss. They want to have all the right answers. And those are the belief systems that need to be uncovered and worked on.
Yeah, I think that's brought us into another interesting space is as leaders kind of assume a invisible responsibility as if you put on this magical cape or a cape for others. You immediately become some sort of like a parent. You need to take care of the group and you have to always be right, and you have this responsibility to try your best to be right, and so you can take care of the team. And maybe the intention is right. It's more of like, oh, I wanted to make right decisions and take care of people. Maybe there are ego evolved, but I believe most of them probably wanted to like do a good job, and maybe they're fearful that if they let it loose too much then they will lose control and they don't know how to lead and how to be responsible.
Well, fear is a huge thing inside organizations. And if you have a culture of fear, you don't have psychological safety. A good friend of mine tells a story about he was working for this company in the late 60s, and his boss was very focused on his behavior and how it wasn't right for the corporate culture. And finally, his boss took him aside and said, look, you're going to have to change your behavior. You're going to have to go on a hillside and knit for a living. My friend looked at him and said, I did that in 65. It wasn't too bad. Of course, he was with the corporation for very long after that, but he wasn't going to collapse to the fear this guy was trying to put on him. So there's a lot of people who get wrapped up in the fear of an organization. And when that happens, the organizational culture starts getting very stiff. And eventually, joke amongst consultants is the organization has died. Unfortunately, the central nervous system is so dead it hasn't gotten to the brain yet. So if you find your best people leaving, and the people you have left are not the ones that you want to keep, I would look at your corporate culture first and see what wisdom is lacking with the leaders that's created that organizational culture.
That leads to the next question is the heart wisdom. Incorporate self wisdom, relational wisdom, organizational wisdom, and moving organizational cultures and leadership toward more of a heart centered space. In the future, how would you envision this heart centered, wise leadership play its magic, show its magic, exude its magic, infuse its magic within organizations? With all the advanced technologies happening like virtual realities, artificial intelligence, and Web3, and yada yada yada.
So there's lots of stuff written about empathic leadership or compassionate leadership. For me, the key piece is, do you take care of yourself so you can take care of other people? So if a person's doing self-inquiry, a lot of people transition to self-inquisition. They literally beat themselves up when they're doing the questions. So if a person cannot take care of themselves and they beat themselves up, there's no way for them to take care of other people because they just won't see it.
And they will transfer this beat up mindset to people who they
Yeah.
probably are most close to.
Yeah. And then the second piece is, can you support yourself so you can support other people? So what are you doing to take care of yourself? What are you doing to support yourself? If you can't do those, it's like trying to write a review of a movie that you haven't seen yet. So you have to go through the process of watching this movie, of caring and sharing and supporting before you can begin to do it with other people. So that's why this self-awareness piece is so critical, and using your loving instincts, caring, sharing, supporting, are critical to doing that.
That's beautiful. I think in a world of collective flourishing, this is exactly the type of leadership that we wanted to see more, experience more, and practice more. And are there any particular thought leaders in the space? I mean, you are definitely one of the. Are there other thought leaders or startups that you've seen that you're like, maybe they're contributing to that collectively flourishing future that you see?
Probably the one that I'm most familiar with is a gentleman named Bill George. He was the CEO of Medtronic and then has been teaching at Harvard Business School. He's written a book called True North, and
Yes.
you see it in his book all the time, and you hear it in his conversations all the time. And so authentic leadership is critical, is a core piece. So there's authentic leadership, there's transcendent leadership, there's wise leadership, and they all have elements of each other embedded in.
I see a commonality. It's all heart-based.
No one version is correct for everybody. So find a version that works for you and begin to emulate it.
Beautiful. As we move into the magic portion of the conversation, let's
Okay.
give our audience a brief recap. So we've talked about wise leadership, aka heart-based or heart-centered leadership, and it includes three interesting dimensions. One is self-awareness, self-wisdom. The second is relational wisdom, and the third is organizational wisdom. And we explored the important factors of, as leaders, we really need to be self-aware. We have to always ask ourselves questions, sitting with that wise sage in your mind as you experience the emotions that you experience, the reactions that you experience throughout the day. And also, another important factor is to breathe, being able to live in present, not the past and not in the future, which you probably heard about many, many, many times. But the tangible strategy is to breathe. So whenever you find yourself getting behind, remember to breathe, and breathe until you find your center moment. Breathe until you can connect with your heart space where you are you and leading from the heart centered space. And relational wisdom, we talked about, sometimes it is more about finding the ideal situation for the person that you really care of, even though that means saying goodbye. However, it may transcend the relationship to a higher dimension where everybody benefits. The organizational wisdom is the most challenging one, and to be able to build collective cohesion and synergy in terms of organization, the culture is the core piece. And the culture that encourages people to be playful, activate their childlike wonder without fear, with plenty of psychological safety is the key. And it all comes down to the leaders, how aware they are, how heart centered they are, and the heart centered leadership will play the magic as a result.
Great synopsis.
Beautiful. The magic. So, Greg, when you were around 11 years old, what did you enjoy creating or playing so much that time disappeared for you?
Well, it's kind of interesting. I grew up in a military family, so I never lived in one place for more than 3 years. Shortest was 6 months. When I was 11, I was living in Brussels, Belgium. So um, my biggest challenge was learning to speak French and operating downtown Brussels with a language that was totally different from mine. So it was okay when I was hanging out with my friends, but when I was by myself, I had to use French. So I learned pretty well to learn to speak French. I was never completely fluent at it. And then when I was a freshman in high school, I thought, well, I'll take a French class. That'll be easy. And the teacher asked the class at the very beginning, does anybody here speak French? But she did it in French. Now, what was really difficult was she had a Southern accent when she asked it. And I responded in French with a correct French accent. And she was like, what? What? Nobody's ever done that. So unfortunately, my grammar in French never really progressed because I didn't really have to work that hard. I could answer all the questions she asked in class, and I could usually get a B or an A on the exam, but my French grammar was terrible. And when I work in Paris, often when I'm off some side street, buying a croissant or something like that, I'll do it in French. And the people just are very, very happy. Here's an American who speaks some French. So that was exciting for me.
That's beautiful.
It was a great learning experience too.
Yeah. And I think sometimes I had similar experiences when I was first learning English is I'm not particularly good at grammar because sometimes it restricts how you speak. I learn more on the concept, the comprehensive kind of way, intuition, like a language intuition of some sort. And that helps. So can totally resonate with you when you're learning French. What role does childlike wonder play in your life?
Really don't know. When I moved from Brussels, we moved to Montgomery, Alabama in 1964 during the height of the race riots. And I went to a school that was mostly cotton farmers' kids. I was in eighth grade. What was very different for me is that many of my eighth grade classmates were 17 working to transition out of school when they turned 18 because they couldn't leave school until they were 18. So these kids were sometimes 4 or 5 years older than me. And obviously they were much more mature. And I've always been a big kid, so they thought I was the same age. But many times I did not understand what they were doing. So that's where I started to learn the importance of culture because I was not a fit in a culture. So that was a challenge.
What's your magic then?
What's my magic? People. I pay attention to people. I listen to what they're saying. I ask them lots of questions, so I'm very clear on the meaning behind what they're saying. And that has not been an easy process for me. I'm still working on it. That's the thing about wisdom. There's no end in sight. It's a continuous program.
Which is fun, right? Once
Yeah.
you see the end of it, it feels it's not as
If you
fun.
understand the process and learning from your experiences, and it's okay to mess up because you've given yourself the freedom to do that, yeah, then it is fun. If you've got a very closed in personality that looks at everything as a threat and you have fear going on, it's not going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, and that's not gonna be a lot of fun working with that person as a leader. We all have some level of intuition, just various level of intuition. And sometimes intuition tells us things.
A lot of people are afraid of their intuition. They think, well, this is a bad thing. And it's not. Like you said, everyone has their own intuition. Fortunately, I got trained by my mother, who I referred to as Swami Mommy. My brother and I could not get into trouble because she would know. And, at one point, she lived on the East Coast, I lived on the West Coast. The phone would ring and be my mom. Okay, what's going on? Nothing, Mom. And then you'd hear the, don't lie to me. And I have to tell her what was going on. She goes, okay, I just was concerned. And so I said, okay, I gotta pay attention to this because she's got it nailed.
Mama's radar
Yeah.
covers full coverage. It's beautiful.
She had that ability and I developed it after that.
That's wonderful. And I think the intuition does play a huge kind of role behind your magic is where how you get to know people, how you sense the culture of the organization. It's all coming from that intuition by birth and by development, by culture and by your own cultivation.
So I would frame this from the point of view connection is a heart of our humanity. So what are we doing to connect with people? And that means connecting with yourself, building relationships with others, building a depth with your organization. It's all about connection.
All about connection, heart-centered connection. Heart and heart connection. If in the future a world where people are able to like open their heart and connect with each other on a global scale, that would be like heaven on earth.
Yeah, and some people you just won't connect with, and that's okay.
That's okay. They have their rights.
Some people you've tried very, very difficult times to connect with them, and maybe the best thing to do is just not respond to them. You have that right.
Respect everybody's decisions. That's also loving, is to give them space they need. Beautiful. And thank you, Greg, for sharing your wisdom and your insights about wise and heart centered leadership. And enjoyed all the stories that you shared. And for folks who really wanted to get connected with Greg and create your own magic, his information is in the show note below. So we encourage you to get connected and chat and create magic.
Thank you so much for having me on your program. It was great to be able to talk about this.